I want to thank you for, doing this interview. It's very exciting, especially
my
as
pleasure.
a Placements
And
fan.
I'm glad you're interested and a fan, and that you've read the books.
Yeah, I actually
That means a lot to me. Thank you.
I have them right here, and I got them from our library. But, yeah.
Oh, they have them in the library at your school?
Yeah.
Oh man, how weird is that?
Is that like surreal to you that your memoir is in like a bunch of like libraries like everywhere?
At colleges, yeah. I don't know how many libraries. You say everywhere. I don't know that everyone wanted one, but it's certainly not in that many bookstores. But a lot of record stores are carrying it, and
yeah,
a couple of we've been doing these book events in different cities around the country. Tommy Stinson and I from Tommy from the Replacements, and so he's got a recent record out for his band, Cowboys in the Campfire. And so he's been doing tour dates. In fact, just this past weekend, we were in Chapel Hill and Raleigh, North Carolina. And then Monday night, we went down to Richmond, Virginia, and did a thing there. Anyway, it's real fun. So it's a lot of fun to do.
I actually saw you actually worked on like with that album that you worked on it. I just wanted to ask, like, how was that working with Tommy and his own like solo work?
Well, I've kind of worked on all of his records. I mean, since the Replacements broke up, we've remained friends, and he whenever he's writing, he sends me rough drafts of songs, demos, and things, and I tell him what I like and what I don't, and then they get into the recording process, and I give them my 2 cents on the mixes and that kind of stuff. And my son and I actually worked on the record together, and we were critiquing the mixes, and my son, his name is Autry. He and I did the sequencing for the album, the order that the songs come in, and so we had a pretty sizable hand in it. And I love working with Tommy, and one of the things about it is I've known him since 1980, and since he was 13, and so he knows I'm going to give him the straight response. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I deliver it nicely, I think, even when I'm critical. So I think we trust each other, and that's a good thing.
Well, I think it's nice that you guys still like work together even to this day. And I think it's cool how like Tommy like started writing his own stuff. Like I remember listening to Trouble on the Way on like the Pleased to Meet Me outtakes. I actually have it right here.
Right.
Yeah.
That's another great one, eh?
I thought it was like cool how he like did his own writing, and that it didn't make the album, but it's like still really good.
Yeah, he started there were a few songs of his in sessions for the Tim record, but they were really unfinished. And I think that if you see the Tim box that we put out last fall, I believe there's a song of Tommy's where Paul took a crack at the vocal, and so that's kind of interesting.
What was that? Having Fun, or what song was it?
Yeah.
I really like that record. I mean, actually, like that track. It's really good.
Yeah. Good.
I actually saw somewhere that you really like "Nowhere Is My Home" because it was about like touring.
Yeah.
I just thought it was interesting how that song didn't make the album, but others did. I know you said that like if you had like more involvement on the Tim record, that you would have like took out some songs.
Yeah, I would definitely.
I was just wondering which ones those were.
Well, I would say Dose of Thunder and Lay 'Em Down Clown.
Yeah, I was gonna say that. I thought those are the 2 tracks because they kind of like stand out as being like
just substandard. I think they're kind of goofy. I think it's a funny thing. I don't know if this will make sense to you or if you'll agree or not, but my feeling is they made 8 records, and I love them all, but Don't Tell a Soul has always been my least favorite. And I think that in an interesting way, and this will sound maybe self-serving, but I don't mean it to be. I believe the first 4 albums, the 4 Twin Tone albums, are the ones where all the tracks matter, even, because every record has your A Squad songs and your B Squad songs, not everything can be I Will Dare standard, for instance, or Left of the Dial standard. And I understand that. And so you have to, position the songs properly. But it seems to me that the kind of B Squad songs on the Twin Tone records are still fun and have a place there. You know, songs like Tommy Gets His Tonsils Out, or You Lose, or Stuck in the Middle. You know, some of those songs that are maybe just not quite the, you know, the top of their game songs. And then when they got to Sire, I think that each album had songs that I would have questioned putting on. And I think, so I just think that's interesting. And, you know, I mean, to some degree, I think it was my involvement that kept those first 4 albums balanced, but I'm not, again, trying to take credit for it. It's just, you know, yeah, it's hard to explain it. I'm not sure exactly why, but it was pretty cool that, you know, that I mean, I like the Twin Tone records play start to finish better than the Sire records to me. Yeah. I think like Don't Tell a Soul has like Asking Me Lies. I think that's kind of a failed attempt at doing a funky song. Yeah. Replacements weren't a funky band. You know, what was that song doing there? Yeah. Or I remember Westerberg saying to me one time while they were making Don't Tell a Soul, he said, "Man," he said, "this is supposed to be my dark pop album, and they're trying to make me write Bastards of Young all over again." And so he started coming up with songs that I didn't feel were true to his heart, like "We'll Inherit the Earth, but we don't want it, want it, want it." That sounded like, to me, a bit of a phony anthem. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. I always thought those records had like a weird like vibe to them.
Yeah.
Like there's too much going into them, and like,
yeah,
they're overthinking it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So. And then surprisingly at the end, even if it was sort of a Paul solo record, I think All Shook Down is one of their best. I mean, I think his writing, you know, had matured so much in a good way. I think like there's been no more fitting epitaph for a band ever than the song All Shook Down. If you ask me, that whole, you know, you got the black and white blues, man, I got them in color, and they're throwing us trunks as we're starting to drown. And some of those lines, I mean, that really kind of tells the story of the end of a band, and I think that's pretty heavy.
I heard you mention that Paul Westerberg's like 14 songs. I was just wondering what you thought about Paul Westerberg's like solo work.
I think it's I like all of the records to one degree or another, but I think they're very spotty. I don't think the A&R on those records was as strong as it could have been. And, you know, Paul didn't have a good sounding board after he and I separated. And again, I'm not trying to pat myself on the back, but we had a relationship where, again, it was kind of like me and Tommy, you know, there was no bullshit involved. It was like if he asked me, what do you think of this song? I would tell him straight, hey, I don't think this one's as good as this one or whatever. And I just don't think he had anybody else after me that he trusted in that way. So there is like there are a couple. Well, I mean, Suicane Gratification, for instance, I think is almost a complete failure. I just don't think that record works at all. And I thought it was very pretentious. And I was around a little bit. Before I was living in LA, that he was recording it here in LA, and I actually went to the studio a couple times, and I'd gotten to know Don Was over the years, and Don was always very gracious towards me, like, you take a listen to this, you ought to know better than I about any, you know, whatever. And I'm going, Don, don't, you know, he's the pro. But anyway, so anyway, that's one record I don't care for too much, but I like, of his solo stuff, I probably like the mono stereo stuff the best. But I do like lots of songs on 14 songs and Eventually and Foker, and I like a lot of that stuff that he released digitally only, where there was like 49 minutes of music with no separation and one song going on in the right channel and a different song going on in the left channel. I thought that was fun and wacky, and yeah. So what do you think of the solo stuff?
I actually really like the solo. Well, they are spotty, but you have to kind of go with like song by song, track by track. I think 14 songs are really good. I've been listening to a lot of like, I think it's called Besterberg. Yeah. But it's like a compilation of like his best stuff. I think that's like really good. Some songs are like, it's very like pop, but like I could handle it. I think it's enjoyable.
Yeah, I have no problem with pop. I thought that I remember reading an interview once where he was talking about his influences or whatever, and then he said something about and again, I like all kinds of commercial music and pop music that the sweet pop stuff and all that, but he made some comment about, I'm not embarrassed to admit that I've got some Carly Simon records in my collection or something. I thought that's the problem. I mean, and that sounds horrible to say, but I just didn't think Carly Simon made records that were all that great. And I think that it got him in a, for instance, on 14 Songs, that song "Runaway Wind." There's a line in there where he says something about, and she comes to you like a shallow, noisy stream, I think is the line. And I just thought, what? Like the Paul Westerberg that I knew, in the 80s would have just vomited at a lyric like that, but here he was, spewing it out. Anyway. But it's that's just one man's opinion. There's lots of people like that song, and, I'm just mouthing off.
What was your reaction when you saw that Paul Westerberg was doing the soundtrack for the movie Open Season? I don't know if you listened to
I have that. I thought it was cool, and especially because he and Tommy were, collaborated on a couple of things there. Tommy played on some tracks, and so I thought that was cool. And I don't know that there's he did a little bit of score and a couple of songs, and I don't think there's anything real outstanding. Nothing maybe, like I say, as good as Mono Stereo Time, but I think it had some fun elements to it.
I just thought it was really interesting. It kind of random, like that they got him to do it, but
yeah,
it's really cool.
Yeah. They have, and when they first contacted me, it didn't really seem like they had their act together yet, and they didn't really know what they were doing, and so I don't know. We get a lot of, I get hit on a lot from people about, we have, they want something from the band, or they want something from me, and it's like, well, you can't say yes to everybody, right? And so I just said, why don't you develop your plan a little bit more thoroughly, and then get back to me. So they haven't got back to me recently, and I think I'd be happy to donate some stuff or loan them some stuff. I have a bunch of stuff in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in Cleveland, and used to have a bunch of stuff up at the Experience Music Project in Seattle, and so. I have a lot of stuff. I never threw anything away. So I've got a room full of, it's all books and records. So, and a lot of working in a record store for 10 years. I never threw any of that stuff anyway either. So I've got all kinds of posters and record store stuff, and lots of it related to the replacements.
So if they're listening to KDVS, they could contact you and get their replacements things. Yeah.
Right.
I was wondering if you saw that one Bob Stinson interview that was kind of recently released.
Yes.
I just thought it was kind of interesting because, like, he seems just like a normal guy, and then you hear all these like Bob stories, and then it's like how was he actually? But I just wanted to know what you thought about that interview.
Well, it's a little hard for me to watch, to be honest. So I haven't watched. I may have seen. I know that, in fact, the guy Steve Birmingham, who did that interview, is now living in Seattle, and I saw him recently when we were doing on the book tour, and spent some time with him. He's a great guy, but Bob was a troubled person, and yet I have mostly really fond memories of him. In some ways, he was difficult to work with, and there was a funny dynamic that I had to navigate all the time, which was that it was really Bob's band to begin with. Bob started the band, brought his little brother in, brought Chris in, and had other singers and other guitar players, come in and out over various periods. And Paul was just one of them who came in and all of a sudden kind of took over the band. And, Bob was, it always made me mad. People treated Bob like he was, stupid, and he was not stupid. He was just not book smart. He didn't go to pay much attention at school and that kind of thing. And, so, but anyway, Bob, in Bob's mind, it was still his band. And so why is everybody paying more attention to Paul Westerberg, kind of thing? And it was like, well, Bob, Paul came in and he could be a front man. He could be a principal writer and all that stuff. But Bob, it just didn't, he had a strange brain. I mean, one of the most unique individuals I've ever known, but I love him dearly. And I think Westerberg came up with the best description. He was the gentle giant. He was a kind of a big guy. And, but he really had a gentle quality to him, and was really a loving person. I spent a lot of great time with him, and he was funny as hell, just funny as hell. So yeah, the interview, in some ways people kind of I think they didn't really make fun of Bob's, demeanor or Bob's, he was just different, and made fun of him. And again, people kind of talked about him as if he was not smart, and that always made me uncomfortable. And I thought that was not true.
I want to talk about the Within Your Reach and Willpower sessions. I know they were different because you guys tried to hide it from the rest of the band, and then Chris Mars walked in, and then I just wanted to...
Not Willpower, but Within Your Reach. Oh. And we actually did we did it, at a certain point, maybe late 1980, early 1981. Well, actually, it wouldn't have been quite that early. Oh, yeah. No, it would have been... Paul started slipping me solo songs that he was working on in his parents' basement, solo piano and guitar stuff, acoustic guitar, some electric guitar, and piano stuff. And I was, I felt privileged that he was sharing this stuff with me. And it really felt, we were very close at that time. And, the five of us, the four guys in the band and me, hung around together a lot. And of course, we traveled together a lot and whatnot. So we were a pretty tight little unit. But Paul and I also spent a lot of time together, just the two of us, scheming about, how to move the Replacements forward. And so when he confided in me that he had these solo things, I was very, I felt privileged. And those songs were so good. And, the first few were sort of sketches and whatnot. And then all of a sudden, bam, he hands me like You're Getting Married and Bad Worker and some of those songs. And I was just, because I already thought he was great. But then when I heard that stuff, I thought I had underestimated him. He's even better than I first thought he was. So it was, so anyway, as I amassed a number of the solo songs that he was doing, I remember putting them all, because he'd give me, they'd be on different scrappy cassettes over time. And so I thought, well, I don't want to have, a dozen cassettes with one song on them that I'm paying attention to. So I would make a little compilation tape for myself. And one night I was sitting by myself and I played all of the solo things back to back. And I was really overcome with how powerful they were and what a great writer he was. And so I made a promise to myself that when I woke up the next morning, I was going to call the recording studio where we did a lot of our work, called Blackberry Way. Main engineer over there was Steve Felstead. And I was going to book solo time for Paul without asking him. But I'd book the time, and then I would call him up and tell him that I had booked time for him. And if he didn't want it, I would cancel him. But, if he did want it, we could do it, again, on the QT without anybody else knowing. So at first, when I said, I just think your solo stuff is so good, I'd like to try to document some of it before you forget some of these songs. And so I booked studio time. I said, but Paul, if you don't want to do it, just say the word and I'll cancel it. If you do, I'll go ahead and confirm it. I was paying for it myself out of my own pocket to keep it off the books so the other Replacements wouldn't think we were spending the band money on solo Paul. And he said, there was some hesitation. I know at first he was uncomfortable with it, and he said, fuck yeah, let's do it. So we were all set to do it. It was a Friday night, I believe. I was working at the counter at Orfolk waiting to get off work. Paul was going to come by and meet me there, and we were going to drive over to the studio. And just before we were leaving, all of a sudden Chris Mars walks in, just spontaneous, he was just in the neighborhood. And, we all lived kind of in the same area, so it wasn't all that surprising. But the timing was awkward. And he sees Paul with a guitar, and we're getting ready to walk out the door, and we're like, shit, we're busted. So we thought, okay, Chris, here's the deal. I said, Paul's been giving me these solo things. I really want to just try to record them. This is not to get in the way of the Replacements at all. I just think it's important. And Chris said, yeah, I understand. Can I come with? And we said, of course. So we swore him to secrecy, and we three jumped in the van, drove over to Blackberry, and Paul started laying down the solo stuff. And interestingly enough, when we recorded Within Your Reach, Paul kind of felt maybe a little like he wanted to include Chris to some extent. And he said, why don't you try throwing a drum track on this? And it didn't fit. As great a drummer as Chris was, it wasn't quite right for the song. And we didn't know why. But Chris got a little bit of emotional about it. I mean, he realized it wasn't right for the song, and it made him feel like, why am I, not, made him feel, like he wasn't as, able to do something, and it made him feel a little bad, I think. But he ended up, taking a back seat, and out of the blue, Steve Felstead, the engineer, said, well, hey, we could try, a drum machine and just see what that felt like. And we thought, well, that's kind of adventurous, and kind of not a lot of punk rock bands were using drum machines back then, or writing songs like this for that matter. And it turned out that, that studio was used by a lot of the other local bands. And one of the biggest local bands was called the Suicide Commandos. They were a huge, important band in our scheme of things. They were really literally the first, notable band that played sort of punk rock music in Minneapolis. Kind of came around in 1975, very early, and so it turned out that the drummer of the Suicide Commandos, his name was Dave All. He had a drum machine that they sometimes used almost like a click track to make sure their tempos were consistent and whatnot. And so Steve said, "I'm sure Dave wouldn't mind if we pulled this out of the storage closet here and used it." And so we put that little, we did a drum pattern there, and it just fit like a charm, we all thought. So it was very exciting. So we recorded Within Your Reach. We recorded a version of September Girls by Big Star, and we recorded a third song called Warning Sound, which was very much unfinished. And that got lost somewhere. I don't know where that went, but I do remember it clearly enough that a portion of that song kind of ended up in the song, I think it was in the song We're Coming Out later on. And there's a line in there, if you know that song, where he goes, one more warning sound. That was a little piece of that song. Oh. So anyway, we recorded those three. Then before we left that night, Westerberg made me erase September Girls. And to be truthful, it wasn't a great version. So it didn't break my heart, although I would sure like to have I wish I had a copy of it. So we just had those two songs left, and we weren't sure what we were going to do with them. And this is when Hootenanny was just a work in progress and didn't even have a title yet. So we were amassing tracks as we went, and we didn't necessarily think right away that, this is going to go on a Replacements record. But as we recorded more and more songs for what became Hootenanny, it really was one of those records where, I think I said this maybe in the book, but I've said it, in other interviews or whatever. I think that there was no rules to what kind of record we wanted to make. It just, the songs, the songs either had to be great or they had to make us laugh, and so that's kind of what we did. So it was really a wide open possibilities there. And all of a sudden, somehow, I don't know if it was Paul's idea or mine, but said, why don't we bring Within Your Reach into the mix? And we brought it into the recording space that we were using at the time. We were using, made most of Hootenanny in a couple different warehouses with a mobile truck that had recording gear in it. And I think at some point we brought the original tapes from Blackberry Way into the mobile unit, and Paul laid a bass guitar track on it. That's him playing bass on that. And then it was also, the warehouse we were in was also used by another twin tone band called the Suburbs, and they had a keyboard player who had a synthesizer. And so Paul said, I wonder if I can use Chan's synthesizer to play a little, melody on this over the top. And so, we I don't know if we got permission from Chan or we just did it and told him later we borrowed a synthesizer. But anyway, you'll hear a synthesizer part in the background of Within Your Reach too. And so that was it. I mean, we just and that was a big deal. I mean, that song obviously was a very important in the progression of the Replacements, and those lyrics. I mean, I can live without your touch if I can die within your reach. I mean, I think that's some pretty poetic writing.
Yeah, I always thought like the track listing was like always interesting for that album. I was just wondering, and also in the book you mentioned like how you thought it was important to like, if you're introducing people to music, like the order that you showed them was important. I was just wondering, like, for the Replacements, was there any like thought to like the order of the tracks in the album?
Oh, of course. I mean, I sequenced all the records, or with the band's approval and help, obviously. But sequencing is one of those things that, for whatever reason, I have a real knack for, and I've sequenced a million records for a lot of different people over the years. And and it's just something I'm good at. I think it has to do with from a very early age. You know, when I was a little kid, I loved to play records for people, and I realized, you know, early on, probably by the time I was 10 years old, I realized that the order that you played songs for people could seduce them into liking the stuff that you're playing for them better if you positioned the songs right, you know, and you kind of play maybe the couple that weren't as good as the big one, and you save that for the bam, you know, to hit them at the end. So anyway, sequencing is something that I love to do, and in that one, when they actually cut the track Hootenanny, I think you may know the story. That was actually done sort of to piss off my partner Paul Stark, who was in the mobile truck recording the stuff, and we had been trying to record the song Willpower, and Westerberg said, I want to be buried in reverb while I sing this, and I want to hear it in the headphones as I sing. And Paul Stark was kind of like a scientist, you know, in a way. He didn't display a lot of emotion. He said, well, we can add the effect after, you know, in the mix. I don't want to put them on, you know, so that they're on the track permanently. And Westerberg got kind of pissed off about it. So when we were done with that, he just had everybody switch instruments, and they bashed out. We knew we wanted to call the album Hootenanny, but there wasn't a song yet. And so they just bashed out that, you know, kind of, it was a big sort of fuck you to Paul Stark in a way. And not in a hateful way, but in a kind of, belligerent sort of way, and in a very childish sort of way, probably. So when the track was done, Westerberg just said, that's it, side one, track one. And I was like, I hope maybe that, do I think that's a good idea? I'm not sure yet. I hope it doesn't necessarily stick, but anyway, it stuck. That's the way the record plays. So yeah, there was a lot of thought put into the sequence, and, you know, Treatment Bound had to end it. You had to get Color Me Impressed in there early, because that was their first, like, really, I think, well, not their first, but it was, you know, it was one of their most important songs. And so anyway, yeah.
My next question was actually about Treatment Bound. I just thought it was interesting how on the album, the quality of that track is like noticeably lower than all the other tracks. But also in Hootenanny Expanded, you guys put an alternate version where it sounds just fine. I was just wondering, like, why that decision was made.
Well, because originally, I mean, this is sort of a convoluted story, but I'll tell it as quickly as I can. Paul had called me up when he had written Treatment Bound and said, I have this new song. It's kind of the Ballad of the Replacements. And I would, what I want to do is I want to record it, a demo, like, or a rough version of it. And then I want to play it for the band, and I want you to bring your tape deck over and record the band hearing Treatment Bound for the first time. That was how he wanted to do it, to hear them kind of guffaw and laugh or whatever they did. And so we tried that, and it didn't really work. So they actually did kind of a hack basement version of it, and we caught that on tape. And then I think in the studio, we thought, well, should we try a studio version? So there was kind of a rough studio version. And then we thought, no, we want to go with the raw version for the album. But then that other one was sitting in the can, you know, as an outtake. And we thought, well, this is the kind of thing that people might get a kick out of hearing. So we put it on as a bonus track.
That's really interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I was wondering how you felt about the Orfolk location, like, reopening.
I'm excited about it. I mean, I think that corner is, a lot back in the day. I remember people saying it was kind of like that intersection was sort of like the Haight-Ashbury of Minneapolis. If you know the history of San Francisco and Haight-Ashbury back in the 60s, you know, it was the center of the hippie movement. Whatever. And obviously this isn't a hippie movement, but it was a center of music in Minneapolis. I mean, again, Orfolk was, people moved to the neighborhood to be close to Orfolk. It was the center of the scene. And it was just totally, it was, so much more than a record store. It was really our clubhouse. And it was such a great place. I just can't tell you how much fun that place was, and how important it was. I mean, we were, there was 4 of us working there, some staff turnover over the years, of course, but we were just, music fanatics. We lived and breathed the stuff. And it was, I shopped at that store because of that vibe before I worked there. So when I was there, we tried to, we kept up the tradition. And it was just, yeah, it was just it was the center of the universe, center of the Minneapolis music scene. So it was just um, uh, um, the fact that there hasn't been a store there for the last couple of years is kind of sad, and now it's going to be back, and there's been a record store there now since with a little break here for the last couple of years that it's been vacant. I guess since 1972. So that's what's that? 28 and 24, 40. Is that 50, 52 years? So anyway, the record store belongs on that corner,
Yeah. I asked a couple of people who are also replacement fans if they had any questions, and these ones are from them.
Okay.
The first one was, when was the last time you saw Paul, and how are things between you guys these days? The same goes for Chris too.
Let's see. Last time I saw Paul was probably 2000. Was it 14 or 15 when they did the reunion show, and the big reunion show in Minneapolis where they played Midway Stadium. And I don't get back to Minneapolis. I live in Los Angeles, so I don't get back there as often. So I haven't seen him since. And the last time I talked to him actually would have been 2000. I guess it was 2019. I had to call and tell him that our friend Tommy Keene had passed away. So our communication ebbs and flows. Paul's not, as you can imagine, he's not a social media guy. He doesn't use a computer. Anyway, and he's a bit reclusive, and he's kind of retired from music. So we don't have a lot to talk about, to tell you the truth. Chris, I see every time I go back to Minneapolis. Last time I saw him would have been in November of last year. And, we keep in touch. We email, probably once a month. He emails me about something, or I email him about something. And, I don't think there's ever been a bad word between us.
Ever listened to Chris Martin's solo work? I know he has a couple of albums out on his own.
Yeah, I really like his solo work. In fact, he's got two full albums out that are only available at chrismarspublishing.com. One that came out last year called The Average Album, and I think it's really good stuff. So he plays all the instruments. And
someone was wondering what happened to the Trouble Boys movie.
Well, it was optioned for a film by a director who was determined to get it done. Said it was his labor of love project, that he had some other very successful films which would allow him to do something a little more off the beaten path. And he got lots of interest, and he needed financing and all that stuff. He had lots of interest, but it was never quite enough, and it got to be a bit of a slog, and he kept getting distracted with other work that he wanted to do then, and he couldn't just keep waiting and waiting and waiting for this replacements thing to happen. It was looking really good for a while. Even Cameron Crowe came on as one of the producers, and but it was also, a lot of it was done during the pandemic time. So they were looking at first about doing a feature film with actors, and then during the pandemic it changed to maybe a limited 5-part series. Obviously keeping it with actors playing the roles of the band members and stuff. And then, he just couldn't get it going, and he sold the rights back to the author of Trouble Boys. And so I think it's up for grabs again. And I'm not sure exactly what's happening, to tell you the truth. I stopped asking because, it was probably not the happiest topic for the author, So I think that to tell you the honest truth, I would ask you, how many rock movies have you seen that are convincing, with actors playing, rock musicians? I've seen very few. So in a way, when it looked like it was not happening, I have to say I heaved a sigh of relief.
That makes sense.
But there's been a documentary talked about. It seems to me that there should be a replacements documentary. But again, that's one of those things that I think the Slim and Tommy and Chris would be fine with, and Paul for some reason isn't greenlighting a documentary, and nobody really knows exactly why, but that's his prerogative, and I respect his opinion.
Yeah. The next question was, what's a Mets song that you didn't like but now love? Is there one?
Boy, I might say "I'll Buy" from the Tim album. I didn't like that, and for some reason, when the album was remixed, I think I had kind of not misinterpreted, but I didn't. There's an angle to the song that I never quite got, and then it occurred to me, maybe even something Paul said in an interview, but it's a bit of a show tune melody, isn't it? I mean, it really kind of almost has a little Broadway element to it or something. And all of a sudden I learned, when I looked at it from that perspective, I appreciated it more. It's still not one of my favorite songs. And when we talked earlier about what would you take off at Tim, and I mentioned, Dose of Thunder and Lay 'Em Down Clown, I think I used to say I'll Buy It was in there too, But now I like I'll Buy better.
What did you think of Bill Sullivan's book?
Loved it.
Yeah.
Thought it was hilarious. I mean, it's in perfectly Bill Sullivan fashion. I mean, he was a a little bit like the court jester, having, I'm not to say he didn't do good work. He was a great guy for driving, for moving equipment, he actually learned how to restring guitars and things, and he wasn't even a musician. I mean, that was, a pretty big deal. We'd never had a guitar tech before.
Yeah.
So when Paul would break a string, it'd be like, or, somebody would break a string, it'd be like, okay, there's a big hole in the show while they restring it. Now, they could keep playing while Bill Sullivan would, put a new string on. That was pretty cool. But, he was just, I think that, as the band progressed, sometimes Paul and I would be butting heads, and Bill Sullivan had a relationship with Paul where he could kind of calm things down when things were a little tense. And I appreciated that very much. I love Bill. I think he's a hilarious guy, and he's done a lot of cool stuff since then, obviously, working with Soul Asylum and Bright Eyes and all that stuff. So yeah, I'm still in touch with him, and he's a real character in a good way.
That's good to hear. Yeah. The next question, I don't know if you know anything about this, but someone was asking about some professional footage from like the Minneapolis reunion show. They're wondering if that would like ever be released.
Don't know. I've seen a bunch of it, and it really is good. And not only did they filmed all the 3 of the Riot Fest shows. So there's finished, maybe not finally finished, but rough cuts of all 3 of those shows, and they're spectacular, I think. I mean, I don't know why they wouldn't put them out, but again, that's not my decision. I'm not, working for the band anymore.
Yeah. Someone asked, I can't imagine there would be much that hasn't been unturned. Is there anything in the future that replacement fans could still look forward to?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think we still have a couple of records to address in terms of Rhino reissues. So I think at some point there will be, obviously Let It Be hasn't been done. I think there could be an interesting combo set done with stuff from Stink and Hootenanny combined, because they were kind of, we were recording stuff for Hootenanny, right? In fact, some of the stuff on the Stink sessions, was, we thought about using on Hootenanny. So there were a couple extra outtakes or whatever. And then there's also All Shook Down. So, I think those things will happen. And I think one of the other things that will be interesting for lots of people is that there's so many live recordings. I think there could be an ongoing series of live releases. And of course, a lot of that is available, through the dark web, so to speak. And, lots of people have, bootlegs of shows and stuff. But we have, in many cases, we have better quality, closer to the original recording than the dubs of a dub of a dub of a dub, they're circulating. And so, and plus on top of that, we have better sources, and we can, we have great people who can do work cleaning them up without putting a lot of 2024 or modern day shine on these old recordings. We would try to keep the integrity of when they were recorded. And so I think there could be a long ongoing live series of just a great number of things that are still very exciting, performances.
That actually leads into my next question. But recently, I sent out like a bunch of emails because I was like really curious. There's this one recording that the Replacements did at UC Davis, and it was in 1991. And like it took me so many emails, but like some guy finally had it, and then I got it, and I was like really excited to like listen to it. It was actually like a really good recording because it was like the first show of that tour, and they're like just like ready to get at it. And,
well, that's great.
Yeah.
I don't know if I have that one, but that sounds interesting. I'm glad to hear it's good.
But I guess I was wanting to talk about the UC Davis performance because I go to UC Davis, and I thought when I was reading the book that was like really interesting that I guess the history of that show. I was wondering if you could tell more about it.
Well, it wasn't a good show. I remember Salem 66 were opening up, a group from, I believe, the Boston area. It was an all-girl band. maybe there was one guy in it. I forget now if it was all girls or maybe mostly girls. But anyway, they were really nice, and I remember them being, pretty excited that they got to open for the Replacements, and then the Replacements kind of did a shit show. Had too much to drink, and I don't remember there really being anything. I don't remember any redeeming moments of that show in Davis, to tell you the truth. And then the dressing room issue was, it was just like, oh God, what are we going to do here? So we just kind of figured, well, let's just go and they'll let us know if we owe them some money, and certainly. As I wrote in the book, partway to the next gig, which was Fresno, I checked in with the booking agent in New York, and he said, "You better not be hanging with the band in Fresno because there's a warrant out for your arrest," because my name was on the contract. So I had to hide when we got to Fresno. I had to not be with the band because I could have been arrested anyway. Then they quickly resolved the thing. I think that the authorities at UC Davis spoke to the booking agent, and he said, look, the band's going to cover it. I give you my word. And if they don't, I will. So nobody's going to leave you holding the bag. So then they rescinded the warrant. But yeah, that was, there were lots, not lots, but there were shows like that were just, there's nothing good about them. And that's, I think that's too bad. But that was the kind of what you got with the Replacements, and much as it made it difficult, it made my job difficult. And I don't, condone, some of that happening. At the same time, there was something about, well, I don't know. I don't know what to say. Sometimes they shouldn't have drank so much, but they did, and we just had to, try to move forward and hope it got better. And sometimes it did, and it was an ongoing thing. I think through the end of the band, they do some great sober shows and some terrible drunk shows, and then there were some great drunk shows too, and there were some terrible sober shows, so it wasn't always the liquor that made them good or bad.
My next question was like, how was starting Twin Tone, and like, how did you get bands to like sign onto like a relatively like new label at the start?
Well, Twin Tone was, we joke about it all the time that we didn't really form a record label as much as we were forced into existence because there were so many great bands in Minneapolis at that time in 1976, 77. And we, I ran a record store. And so we dealt with a lot of independent labels from all over America and England and other places. And so I think that it started to occur to us that, hey, maybe we should do one, I thought it was inevitable that somebody would start a label in Minnesota. And I didn't think at first that it was going to be me, but, a couple of people started talking about it and I got roped into it. And it was a 3-person partnership that we formed. And we did that at the tail end of 1977 and formed the partnership. And then in 78, we incorporated and started recording. We wanted to make EPs with a couple different bands. We ended up signing 3 local bands. And, we just, everybody, I mean, Paul Stark and Charlie Hallman were maybe less visible to the bands, but everybody knew me from the record store and from DJing at the Longhorn and whatnot. So I think they just thought, there was I'm happy to say maybe a trust factor, and there was we were the only game in town, so hey, you want to make a record? We're making an offer here. There was I don't remember any of the local bands saying no. There were a couple of people that I was dying to record that were touring bands, and they said no, and that was sad. But that's why I understood that we didn't have a track record, as you say, and yet a lot of bands were happy to sign on the dotted line, and some weren't. That's just the way it works.
I also read in the book that you actually turned down Husker Du. I thought that was like really interesting. I know someone asked if like you regret signing Husker Du or not signing Husker. No,
I don't. I love the guys, and they were I saw them all the time. I DJ'd at the club, and they played there a lot, and so I became great friends with them. Greg didn't hang around so much, but Grant and Bob both did. They were in my apartment at the record store or whatever. So I really liked those guys. But when Grant gave me the demo tape, I'll tell you two things. One was, I love punk rock, but I'm not a big fan of hardcore. And Husker Du had a lot of hardcore in them. I love the punk rock side, but maybe not the hardcore side. And also, probably the main reason was that Charlie Hallman, our third partner, and the guy who came up with the seed money to start Twin Tone in the first place, he was a little older than Paul Stark and I, and he would not have gotten, understood, the Husker Du thing. I think it would have made him feel uncomfortable. It would have made him feel old. Like, here's some new trend or new style of music that I don't get. And it would have made him feel bad. And I said, I just can't do that to Charlie. I loved him too much. And he's a good friend and obviously integral to the starting of the label. And so I just said to Grant, Grant had been the one giving me the demo. And I just said, with all due respect, I just don't think this is the right thing for Twin Tone right now. And I think they were unhappy about it. It didn't, I'm sure it affected our friendship to some degree, but it wasn't like they ever got pissed off and wouldn't speak to me or anything. But I do know that I didn't realize it at the time, but they started their own label afterwards called Reflex. And I think that, some years later, Grant or Greg maybe said to me, we called it Reflex as a reflex against being turned down by Twin Tone. So, but yeah, it was one of those things. It wasn't quite right for what we were doing at Twin Tone. I didn't think.
I think that's like pretty much all my questions. But
okay.
Thank you so much for doing this interview with me. I really appreciate it.
Great. And how much? Yeah. When do you finish with school?
I finish with school next week.
Next week.
So,
wow.
Yeah.
Cool. And then what are you going to?
Finals.
Well, best of luck. I hope you come out with flying colors.
Yeah. Thank you.
Well, best of luck to you.
All right.
And you say it Valentin?
Valentin.
Yeah. Well, I love the name, and it's a pleasure to meet you and to talk to you, and I appreciate your, interest and enthusiasm.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
You take care.
You too.
Bye-bye. Keep in touch.